Welcome to the Workology Podcast, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, gain powerful insights, resources, and perspectives on the industries of human resources and recruiting. Join your host, Jessica Miller-Merrill, chief blogger at bloggingforjobs.com, for an in-depth and no-holds-barred look into the future of our most powerful business asset, the employee. And now, welcome your host, Jessica, with this podcast episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, and thank you for making us part of your week. Today, we're going to be talking about sourcing. Phone sourcing, internet sourcing, online search, trying to find these hidden nuggets, these purple squirrels, if you will, candidates that are hidden out there in the internet who are maybe interested in coming to work for our company or certainly just entertaining the option of learning more about our organization. We're going to be talking today with Jim Stroud. He's the Senior Director of RPO Recruiting Strategies and Support for Randstad SourceRight. Basically, to alleviate sourcing headaches for his clients, and he produces a podcast also. It's called It's All Recruiting, and he has a new book that has just come out for job seekers that he's going to be talking with us about. Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
Give us a little bit of insight into the podcast and then the new book.
Sure. Well, the podcast is called It's All Recruiting, and I talk about every aspect of recruiting and anything I think is interesting about recruiting, whether that is employment branding, whether that's neurodiversity, which is a new term that's being bandied about quite a bit these days, or if it's a new sourcing method, anything and everything that I think pertaining to the world of recruiting that I think will be interesting to my listeners.
Well, let's go ahead and get started, and let's talk a little bit about sourcing. So you've been doing sourcing for a long time. So first, what is it, and how did you get started?
Sure. Sourcing is sort of half art, half science, and a lot of people in my industry, they sort of debate what the actual definition of it is, but this is mine. And when I say it, I'm sure some might push back on it, but this is how I define it. I define sourcing as finding a qualified, interested, and available candidate for a particular job, then introducing them to a hiring party. Although the candidate could be an active job seeker, somebody who's looking for work right now, more likely they are passive, meaning that they might not know that an opportunity for them even exists.
Cool. And I feel like sometimes we have more passive job seekers than active job seekers out there in the market, especially in this one maybe where people have a lot of options. They might not be actively looking, but you find them, you can connect with them, and forward them over to the hiring manager if they have an interest.
So true. I think this is a very interesting time to be in recruiting. Every other day, it seems like I see an article about how everyone is looking for work, those who are unemployed, but particularly those who are employed. And everyone's open to new options. And one of the things that I think is speaking to that is this trend I'm seeing of anonymous job hunting. There are different mobile apps out there, like one in particular called Anthology, which used to be called Poachable. And what that app does, it allows people to search for work anonymously. It's sort of on that Tinder model where I, as a job seeker, could look at a job and say, okay, I think I like that job, and I will swipe to the right. The company would see my profile, swipe to the right. At that point, we would connect and discuss the opportunity. And if I like what they have to say, I'll give them my contact information. But if not, then they will never know who I am. And that particular app, Anthology, I keep wanting to say Poachable because that's what it was, but they recently rebranded it. But that particular app has made a splash in the HR world, so much so that a lot of copycats have come out to try to gain on its momentum. I mean, you have apps like Jobber and Blanc and Weave and Tinder and Poached and other things out there. So I think that there is a trend of a lot of people who want to look for work and do it under the radar, and those apps sort of help you stay anonymously so you can do that. I think I rambled that. Did I answer the question? I'm not sure anymore now.
Oh, no, I thought it was great. And so Poachable or now Anthology, they came out of Talent Tech Labs in New York, actually. And I think there's a huge need for this kind of product, particularly in technical recruiting, like the STEM market, because these candidates don't want to be found, or they don't want to be found because recruiters are calling them sometimes 15, 20, 25 times a week. So they want to do it on their own terms. And Anthology and products like that are a good solution for those particular candidates.
Sure, and I think not even from the job search perspective, but from a career insurance perspective as well. I mean, I think it would be really cool to just sort of put your information out there anonymously so you don't endanger your job. And then you can sort of gauge how marketable your skills are by the people who are reaching out to you. So if you have people constantly contacting you, say, oh, wow, I must be a really hot candidate because people are always reaching out to me, but I don't have to worry about being called or being hounded by email because they don't know who I am. So, I mean, if I do have a day where I go to work and I'm just not feeling it that day and I think, you know what, I think I'm ready to look somewhere else, you can go right to your Anthology app and see what's out there. So I think it's good from a career insurance kind of perspective as well.
The power is in the job seeker's hands right now in this marketplace.
So true.
Let's talk a little bit about what the secret is to sourcing, because not everyone can be a great sourcer. There is an art, there's a science to it. How can leaders leverage sourcing to help them in their recruiting and hiring efforts?
Well, let's see. I have this thing called the 7 highly effective habits of sourcing. And if you have these basic 7 tactics in mind that'll really help you for your sourcing game, the number one, I think, is to be just curious. I think back in 97, so many years ago, when I started, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no formal training, and there wasn't much formal training available. I think at the time when I started, AIRS wasn't even around at that point. So what I did was I researched and I experimented and researched and experimented some more. And nowadays, there's a lot of training available online, and so I would tell people to take advantage of it, and because you never allow yourself to get too comfortable with your knowledge. The moment you think you know it all is the moment you fall behind. So all that to say, the very first tenet in being a highly effective sourcer is to be curious, insatiably curious. Another thing that you can do is to use data. One thing that I would encourage recruiters to do is to consider the hiring manager or the clients that you support, and look at and find some data around them. Which companies do your hiring managers tend to recruit from? If you know that the hiring manager you typically recruit from hires people from company A, B, or C, save yourself some time and headache and give your sourcing efforts over to finding people who are from companies A, B, and C, because that's where historically the hiring manager tends to recruit from. Same as from schools as well. Another thing, third thing I would suggest is to leverage imagination. Always be willing to experiment and leverage tools that may not be designed for recruiting. And one example that comes to mind is something that Hootsuite did under the advice of Laura Smith, I believe. And what Hootsuite did was they did a series of Periscope events. For those who aren't familiar with Periscope, Periscope is an app that is owned by Twitter, and they allow you to broadcast live video. So what Hootsuite did was they had their CEO turn on his Periscope app, and he walked around his office and talked about how wonderful it was to work at Hootsuite. And he did that for so long. And then when he finished his portion of what he wanted to say, then they had another live Periscope event the next hour. And so when it was all said and done, people who were following them on Twitter or on Periscope saw a virtual tour of their offices all over the world. And they were able to do that, Hootsuite that is, they were able to do that, promote their offices all for free, because Periscope is a free app. So although Periscope was not intended to be a recruiting app, it certainly was leveraged in that way. Another effective habit, number 4 of 7 is to be an expert. And this is something that I was telling somebody the other day, and they sort of blinked when I mentioned this to them. I said, the same way you can source and find candidates online and get information on them, I said, well, guess what? Job seekers can do the same thing to you. So, Mr. or Ms. Recruiter, keep that in mind. What I would say is take the time to brand yourself as an expert recruiter, so that when job seekers are going through the different emails, especially if they're a highly sought-after candidate, and they're getting all these spammy generic emails, and they're sort of disregarding the emails they're getting from recruiters, you want to make sure that when you send them an email, they respond to you. Now, one way you can do that is that you set up your LinkedIn profile in such a way so that when they look at your profile, they say, okay, the way you describe yourself and what you do at your present job is, I don't know, you're a recruiter for company X, and in the past year you placed 200 candidates in the field of Java development of Ruby on Rails, and not only have you listed your stats of how many people you placed in the past year, but if I look at the recommendations section, I see not only that your coworkers have said great things about you, but the people that you've hired have said great things about you. I find one of these highly sought after, sophisticated job seekers, I'm going to look at your profile and say, wow, this person is great. They're worth my time, because not only are they placing a lot of people as evident by what they said, but they also have a series of testimonials, not only from coworkers, but people that they have actually hired. So that's something else to be effective. Another thing would be to be a highly effective sourcer would be to be an enthusiast. If you are, say, recruiting scientists who are experts in nanotechnology, then you should be sharing content on nanotechnology across your social media profiles, and then joining in online conversations or blogging about nanotechnology as best you can. Because this will set you apart from other recruiters who, frankly, will say, you know what, I don't have enough time to do that. So I'm not going to share articles or look up information to share about nanotechnology because I don't have time because I'm so busy working. Well, while they're thinking that way, great, because that's good for you. Because if you'll do it, you'll be able to attract more passive candidates who don't have a resume out there, or who might not have a LinkedIn profile, or who may have a LinkedIn profile but they're hiding themselves from recruiters. I was talking with someone about this the other day as well, about how people hide their identities on LinkedIn from the standpoint of using different buzzwords to describe their skill set. Like instead of putting Java developer on their profile, they may put Java Ninja or Java Guru or Java Code Warrior, something like that. Someone else who was in the business would know that a Java Code Warrior is probably a Java developer, but recruiters would not, more than likely, not be looking when they're doing a search for Java Code Warriors. They're looking for Java developers, so they're able to stay under the recruiting radar doing things like that. But if you're sharing information on your profile and attracting them to you by virtue of what you're sharing, then you're going to connect with those kind of people who are hiding from you. Virtue number 6 out of 7, highly effective habit of sourcing, is to be authentic. And this is one thing I don't see recruiters do, which sort of surprises me, but I guess I shouldn't say surprises me. It's something recruiters don't do. Not saying they're not authentic, but what I'm saying is, it's one thing to say to a candidate, hey, come work at my company, it's a great place to work. And it's another thing to say, hey, come work at my company, it's a great place to work. And when they check you out, recruiter, and they see your profile, they find you on Twitter or other places, and they see pictures of you with your coworkers having lunch together, or they see you out doing a charitable initiative sponsored by your employer. And so the job seeker will say, wow, not only has he said it's a great place to work, but I see on his social media profile that he's having a good time actually working there. He must be an authentic recruiter. He's honest, and he's not just throwing something up against the wall hoping that it'll stick. So all that to say, recruiters give job seekers something to find that validates your claim of how great it is to work there. And then finally, on this long rant that I'm doing, to be a highly effective sourcer, you got to know your competition. Learn all you can about the companies you're competing with, so you can make more persuasive arguments when engaging candidates currently working for your competition. For example, if you learn that people hate the blue carpeting at one rival company that you're targeting, well, be sure to mention how much you and your coworkers admire the blue carpeting at your office. If someone at a rival company says they're working me too hard, be sure to say how great the work-life balance is at your company. You find that kind of research in Glassdoor. You find that kind of research when you're talking to the candidates themselves. Get the information that you need so you can have better engagement on down the road. That's the end of that long rant.
So that was the 7 habits of effective sourcing. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a little bit of a reset here and catch our breath. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology Podcast powered by Blogging for Jobs. We're talking today with Jim Stroud. He's the producer of It's All Recruiting podcast and the author of three books. You can follow Jim on Twitter at just twitter.com/Jim Stroud, JIMSTROUD. All right, let's talk more about sourcing. Let's get back to it. Why is it so popular? I feel like there's a million tools out there right now. So many good blogs out there. You're talking about sourcing a lot. There's a lot of other experts, thought leaders who are sharing resources about sourcing. Why sourcing the talk of recruiting?
I point to a couple of data points of why I think sourcing is so popular. One is the Career Crossroads Source of Hire report that's produced every year by Jerry Crispin and Mark Mueller. And every year they produce this report. It's a survey analysis. They've interviewed, I think, 2,000 companies. I forget how many companies, but they talk to a lot of companies. And they say, hey, company, how are you finding your hires? You know, at the end of the day, where are you getting your hires from? And so consistently, the number one place that companies are finding their hires has been employee referrals, then followed, and this is citing the most recent survey. And then number two is the career site, number three is job boards, number four is sourcing. So when I look at that, initially I say, okay, so since most of the hires are coming from employee referrals, I should probably focus that much on that and not so much on sourcing since it's a little bit further down the list. Well, that's at first glance. When you look a little closer in the most recent Career Crossroads Source of Hire report, you'll notice that the employee referrals have taken a dip, a little bit of a hit. They're gone down in popularity among companies. Also, job boards have also gone down a little bit in popularity. Also, so has using the career site also gone down in popularity. But when you look at sourcing from the past couple of years, it has more than doubled in use. You know, so companies are finding are gravitating towards sourcing a great deal more because it's effective, and I think because it's also helps them save money. You know, one thing job seekers don't think about, but certainly recruiters do, is that job boards cost money. So if I can post a job, if I can do a search rather through Google or some other means and find the talent that I need, then I've saved so much money. I've kept myself from spending so much money on job boards or other services that are out there. Another data point I would point out as well is the social recruiting survey that's produced annually by a company called JobVite. And in their most recent survey, they ask different companies, recruiters, hey, you've heard of LinkedIn, of course, Facebook, Twitter, and all these other social media sites out there. Are they really effective for hiring? Are you really making hires with them? So according to their survey, the number one place that recruiters are going to find candidates to make hires is LinkedIn by a wide margin, which probably comes as no surprise to anyone. But some of the other leading sources of hire that recruiters are finding hires from through social media is Facebook, surprisingly enough, and Twitter, and then in fourth place, blogs. I think it's because everybody likes free. Again, if I can do a search on LinkedIn for free, certainly they have premium services as well, but I can get a lot of information on LinkedIn for free, certainly information on Facebook for free, Twitters and blogs and so on. It helps my bottom line. And so if it works, if I can make a hire and save some money, why not? So that's why I think why it's growing in popularity so much.
What's your favorite sourcing tool right now? We talked about Anthology, but what are some things that are on your radar?
Curiously enough, because there are so many tools out there, and I'll certainly name some of them, I lean myself more these days towards tools that help me engage the candidate better. And I almost see them as sourcing tools. Like, for example, there's a Chrome browser extension called Get Signals, which allows me to check, which gives me notification when someone opens up an email that I sent them. So if I send a email to a candidate, I'll know if they've opened it, when they've opened it, and then I'll know, okay, they opened it on this day, this time, and they haven't responded, so I guess they're not interested, or I'll try it again later, that kind of thing. Other tools out there that I like, again, speaking to candidate engagement, one is called Schedule Once, which is very handy because with that, candidates can book themselves on my calendar. So if I say, instead of sending emails back and forth 100 times trying to find the best day and time, click this link, book yourself on my calendar, and we'll talk from there. I mentioned earlier how a good sourcer, a good recruiter, will share content so that passive candidates will gravitate towards them. One tool that I use, and actually is one of the few tools I pay for, is an app called Buffer. And you can get to it by going to bufferapp.com. And what that does is I can find different links, articles, or content that I want to share. I'll load them up on Buffer. And then at 12 o'clock, it'll share something to my LinkedIn. And at 1 o'clock, it'll share something on my LinkedIn, and 2 o'clock, and so on. So it gives the illusion that I'm tweeting and sharing 24/7, when in fact I've actually just spent maybe an hour or so looking for information that I wanted to share. It also allows me to share content on a timer and give me great stats for LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Google+, and Pinterest. And quite recently, they've added the functionality of allowing me to upload video to post at different times, which I'll definitely be experimenting with that even more in the future. I also use Riffle and Vibe, which is sort of like a Connectifier, which shows me the other social networks that a candidate is a member of. So if I come across somebody on Twitter, I can mouse over their name, and I'll see that they're also on Google+ or Facebook, what have you, and I can reach out to them that way. Playing around with Periscope, and I'm also recommending it to different clients that I work with for the same reason I mentioned earlier, because of Hootsuite's experiment when they were able to give virtual tours at their offices with it. I'm also using a tool quite a bit called Hively. Hively allows people to give real-time feedback on my service. And how it works is in my email signature, underneath my name and contact information, you'll see 3 faces: a happy face, a sad face, and an angry face, I think it is. And so if someone is dissatisfied with my service or dissatisfied with any of the people who report to me, they can click that face, whatever face is applicable, and say, I'm clicking the sad face because I'm not happy with the service someone gave me. I'll get notified of it, and I'll be able to see what the issue is and resolve it. Likewise, if someone hits the happy face, I'm able to see that as well. It also gives me a leaderboard, so I can see who of my team members are generating enough happy faces over time, which I can appreciate because at the end of the year when doing performance reviews, I can factor in how many positive responses or negative responses they receive from our clients over time. But when it comes to, and those are all speaking to candidate engagement, but when it comes to actually sourcing, I'm really gravitate towards a lot of the eGrabber products, especially Resume Grabber, because of the way it grabs missing contact information and places it into an Excel sheet. It's really convenient for me, and I have to give a disclaimer here that when I used to own the Recruiters Lounge, they were a sponsor of the Recruiters Lounge. So just throwing that out there. But even if they were not, I still would like their product because I can program it to do different things, such as I can add in different search strings that I use and to sort of automate a lot of what I do with their tool. So I like a lot of eGrabber's products, especially Resume Grabber.
I love all this, and I think Hively sounds great. I love that you can get real-time feedback, and then maybe if somebody is frustrated or happy, they can show their appreciation or their dissatisfaction in a different way.
Yep. Yep. Because it all comes down to relationships. I think one thing that hurts the recruiter job seeker relationship is that recruiters more often than not have like a ton of recs they have to fill. And more often than not, they have a hiring manager or a client barking in their ear saying, "Where's my hire? Where's my hire? Where's my hire?" So they tend to look at people as numbers, and they need to get as many resumes to the client as possible or something along those lines. And they become really numbers driven, and they become really busy, but not necessarily productive. Someone who takes the time to build a relationship with a candidate, that can pay off for many years to come as they refer other people to them, or as they move around and refer more people as they get new jobs. But if a recruiter only looks at people as numbers and resumes as just numbers, and then they're not taking the time to develop that relationship, then they're really missing out, because every person that a recruiter talks to is actually 10 people or more, because everybody knows somebody, and you never will meet or be connected to the people that they know if you treat the initial person badly. So having tools that give real-time feedback on how well my people are doing is valuable.
You're talking a lot about candidate engagement, which I love. And so regardless if you're a recruiter or a sourcer who's focused on finding the hidden talent online or over the phone, candidate engagement is important. But when you're finding somebody, let's say you found somebody on Twitter and you use one of these tools that you mentioned and you pick up the phone and call them, do the candidates like it when you just sort of call them out of the blue or engage with them, sourcing them instead of waiting for them to apply in a traditional sense for a job?
I would say yes and no, because it depends on the approach. I was at a conference, SourceCon conference actually, early this year, and a pal of mine, Glenn Cathy, did a very good presentation where he brought several highly sought-after professionals on the stage. These were like data scientists, developers, people any recruiter could easily place because they were so talented. And he said, okay, for the next hour, we're going to let these highly sought-after professionals vent about why they hate recruiters so much. And with the presentation went on for about an hour. It could have easily have gone on for 2 hours. And some of the points they brought up was one of the ones that you're mentioning there, was about the approach. These people on the stage, one of the things they didn't like about recruiters was how they are approached by recruiters. They typically are not approached from the standpoint of, hey, can we talk? Can I get to know you? I know a lot about your industry, so I think this job will be of interest to you. What it really happens is that a recruiter will say, hey, I have a job. I want you to take it. It's perfect for you, which is translated by the job seeker as, how do you know what's perfect for me? You don't even know who I am. It's our first time talking. You're throwing stuff at me, hoping that I'll bite, but I'm not, and you're annoying me. So it was curious. One thing that was really interesting that they said, too, was that right before they appeared on stage, someone gave a demonstration of different sourcing hacks, and one of the hacks that someone had shown was how to hack into a web traffic cam, which was kind of interesting. And so,
wow.
Yeah. And so Glenn had asked him and said, okay, you've seen some of the things that these sources can do in order to find people like yourself. How do you feel about that? And so I think it was 5 people on the stage. And then 2 people were like, oh, that's kind of creepy. That's kind of weird. But 3 people, the remaining three people on the stage thought, you know what? I appreciate that. Because you're going through the trouble of learning who I am. You're going through the trouble of trying to track me down, knowing my background. After doing all of that work, I'm sure you would not come to me with something that's not worth my time, because you spent so much of an effort just to find me. They say how much they detest it, and I mean, I can't even stress this enough. They detest generic emails. Again, we speak to recruiters who are number-driven, who feel like they have to reach out to 100 people to maybe get that one hire, instead of making a qualitative approach. One thing that stood out to me from that conversation, for that presentation, was that how much they appreciated if a recruiter just reached out to them and said, hey, I'm the new kid on the block. I want to know more about the industry or more about what you go through on a professional basis so that I can interact better with you in the future, or people like you. And they said that a couple of people said that they would appreciate if a recruiter just did that. Hey, take the chance to get to know me, or take the chance to get to know the industry. Another thing that drove them crazy was that a recruiter will see a couple of keywords on a resume and think that this person was a good match for the role just because they saw a couple of keywords. That drove them up the wall. They said they hated that. And some people even said that although they're on LinkedIn, they don't check their emails a lot of times unless they are ready to make a switch. So then it's just a luck of the draw if they happen to reply to one of your emails in that way. So it's definitely, as I see it, a job seeker's market. And I think it's incumbent upon the recruiter to brand themselves as a professional, brand themselves as someone who understands the industry that they are recruiting for, and also it's incumbent of the recruiter to take a qualitative approach to their recruiting. Take the time to know people one-on-one and to develop a relationship. It's almost sort of like recruiters have to have an agency mindset, as opposed to maybe a corporate recruiting mindset. And what I mean by that is, when I was an agency recruiter, not only did I have to make connections with people in the industry because I relied on their referrals, but I also had to know their children's names. I had to know what their favorite sports team was. I had to know what movies they liked, that kind of thing, because I had to go beyond them knowing me as a recruiter. They had to know me as a person, because once they were comfortable with me as a person, then they felt comfortable referring other people to me, and that was the livelihood, especially in agency. I think in corporate America, a lot of recruiters are comfortable because they don't really have that drive of hire or you don't eat as they do in agency. So, long ramble. But all that to say, recruiters need to have a more qualitative approach if they want to successfully engage job seekers these days.
One of the things I love about you, Jim, is just how much you give, right? Like, you're taking the time to talk with us today. You've been a longtime blogger. You're a podcaster. You're a teacher. You provide resources for recruiters, sourcers, and also job seekers. Why are you so passionate? Like, what drives you to do all this?
Well, I've always been sort of a giver. But in terms of job seekers, when I was first married, my wife was laid off from work, and shortly thereafter, I think within a couple weeks of her being laid off, I was laid off from work. And nothing tests your love more than two people out of work looking at each other. And this happened around a recession, so it was especially difficult at the time to find work. And although I was not out of work very long, I still had no idea how long it would be when I was in it. So I did all kinds of things to find work and generate an income through various entrepreneurial endeavors and as well as traditional job searching. And long story short, I was laid off 3 times in my career since '97. And the longest I've ever been without a steady job has been about 2 months. And the reason for that is that I've put certain practices in place that keep me in a position to be found by potential employers. So much so, I often have to turn away inquiries from recruiters and end up referring those opportunities to others. But despite of all of that, I've never forgotten what it's like to be laid off and not know what to do next. And it was really traumatic for me. And so from time to time, I would always give back. I either maybe speak at a church function, giving advice to job seekers there, or some kind of job seeker-related group or an event. And I would always share what I learned as a job seeker to help people out because, like I said, I've never forgotten. And it got to a point once where I just couldn't go everywhere that I was invited to speak because people tend to enjoy what I say, for better or worse. So one thing I did was I would make a video series. I had a season of my show, the Jim Stroud Show, dedicated to job search strategies. And then I did webinars, and I recorded these webinars just so that when people reach out to me, I say, hey, go check out this webinar, check out these videos, because that way I can assist more people without stretching myself so thin. And that eventually led to me writing a series of blog posts, which became a book with that added to, which is the book that I have now. Called the #1 job hunting book in the world, because I wanted it to be the type of book that could be the #1 job hunting book in the world, and I wanted it to be full of information that the average job seeker may not be aware of, certainly things that is not common to the average person out there.
I love the title. It definitely gets your attention, and we'll put a link on the transcript of this podcast so that you can check it out. But it's on sort of the usual suspects, Amazon. You can just search for the #1 job hunting book in the world and be connected. Or you can go to Jim's blog at jimstroud.com and gain access to the book from there as well. Well, I mentioned your blog, which is also a great place, lots of good resources. We have the podcast. Where can people go to learn more about you? Is there any other place on the internet that we haven't mentioned that they should go and check out to learn more about Jim Stroud?
Well, I'm everywhere because I love social media, but you can find me on jimstroud.com, as you mentioned. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter, Pinterest, Facebook, just whatever social media is out there. Just look for Jim Stroud, because that's the username I use for all of them. So I'm easy to be found.
Well, awesome. And thank you, Jim, for joining us today here on the Workology Podcast. We very much appreciate it. I also want to thank you for taking the time to listen and learn more about what Jim does and more about the 7 effective habits of sourcing. This is the Workology Podcast, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, HR, and recruitment. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and until next time, you can visit bloggingforjobs.com to listen to all our previous podcast episodes.
Production services for the Workology Podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill provided by Total Picture Media.